We begin with breaking news from the Harris campaign. Moments ago, the campaign released a first look at its battleground state operation, and it's kicked into high gear since the vice president joined the race. In the last 12 days alone, volunteers have placed 2.3 million phone calls, knocked on 172,000 doors, and sent nearly 2.9 million text messages to voters in the 7 battlegrounds. Now, this grassroots support comes as Vice President Harris secured enough delegates to win her party's nomination. We should note the results aren't official until virtual voting closes on Monday. But it's a feat. Joining us now is Dan Cannon, who is the Battleground States Director for the Harris campaign. Ooh, all right, Michael, these numbers are crazy.
Hey, these numbers are crazy. Dan, you guys, the sheer level of organization is incredibly strong. You're looking at, for example, in blue wall states alone, over 100,000 voters have signed up to attend events. Yep. In some belt states like Georgia and North Carolina, you got tens of thousands of supporters signing up for events in the last 12 days. 63,000 signups in Georgia, nearly 40,000 in North Carolina. Give us a peek behind the curtain, because I think a lot of people, obviously the headlines were the big noise, the shifts, the tectonic shifts, as we were talking a little bit before, within the campaign, watching the debate, the flatlining of the president steps down, the vice president steps up, yet and still beneath that, the organization was building and continuing despite what was going on top side.
That is very true, Michael, and I'll tell you that this incredible enthusiasm we're seeing, it's organic, right? There are hundreds of thousands of folks coming to us, signing up for this campaign. 170,000 signed up to the campaign in the first week since the president endorsed the vice president, and it was 360,000 by the end of that weekend. But in that weekend, last weekend, we had already planned a weekend of action with 2,300 events in battleground states, 1,400 staff, more than 260 offices. We've been planning and expecting a close race across the 7 states Simone mentioned this entire time. There's just political gravity. It requires an organization. It requires building trust and relationships, building a volunteer army, and having the infrastructure to do something with it. And so when that enthusiasm has come, and it is real and it's here, there's a place for it to go, and those hundreds of thousands, then millions of voter contacts is how you win a close election. We feel really good about what's happened in the last couple of weeks.
Dan, talk to us a little bit more about the infrastructure here, because I think campaigns are, the candidate is important, the message is important, but you can have the right candidate, a great message, but if you do not have the infrastructure to support getting that message out and organizing people and eventually turning them out to the polls, it doesn't matter. And I do want to juxtapose this with the Trump campaign has been closing offices, and not much has been made about their infrastructure. They have doubled down. They're running an unconventional campaign in many ways. And these offices and just the people, it's insane that you all have.
You guys know better than I do that the media environment in this country is incredibly fragmented. It's siloed. It is really hard to cut through, even with big moments. And in that environment, in states that are close elections, and frankly, folks, across the spring and summer, didn't want to talk about Donald Trump and tune into politics and want to go to barbecues and have their summer vacations. If you don't have an infrastructure that's on the ground, that finds authentic ways to reach people where they really are, in community, whether that's online or in person, then that stuff is like, stuff bouncing off satellites in the middle of space, right? You have to have something that anchors it to something real in a community. We feel very strongly we've done that. And to your point, Simone, the Trump campaign simply hasn't. They made a huge deal in 2020 about having these community centers in places like Las Vegas. And I think they actually were a bit effective for them at that time. They've shuttered all of those community centers. They've abandoned those voters. I think there's a lack of respect the Trump campaign has for actually engaging real people on the ground and having a relationship. But by contrast, our folks are there on the ground. We've got places in Nevada that don't just do voter contact. They connect folks to social services. They have entertainment. They're physically present and connected to people. And then when the ads come, when the debates come, when the conventions come, it feels a lot more real to folks because you can cut through with that organization on the ground.
So, Dan, a lot of what you're saying goes to the heart of what James Carville had raised up earlier in the week, and I reinforced in conversations that I was having subsequent to that in reaction to people who thought, oh, well, you're trying to dampen us by telling us not to be enthusiastic. No, what I think Carville was very clear in saying was the enthusiasm's great, but everything is what you're saying is what it has to be channeled into. That enthusiasm has to go into something in order for you to have the outcome at the ballot box in November.
Yeah, I think the thing people should understand about this race is that throughout the events of the spring and summer and into now, those big moments we talked about, the race didn't move a ton in either direction. A couple of points here or there, maybe on the national polls. And by the way, I don't think those head-to-head polls mean much anyway in the summer. Right. But we've seen, no matter what the polls were in 2022, no matter what they were in 2020, there's gravity and stuff snaps back into a very tight race. And those 7 states Simone mentioned are going to be close. They are just going to be razor close. And if you have an organization that can cut through and on the margins talk to voters, mobilize them, persuade them, do things like hear ballots, register people, deal with misinformation and disinformation, and have a presence that's respectful of the voters and their choices, that is how you win a close election. The theory of the case here has been the same all along. Jen O'Malley Dillon has said this a ton. There's 7 individual states, not just a national election, but 7 places you got to go to compete. We've been competing, and we think that will be the difference in a tight race. But it will be a tight race. This is a great momentum, but it's additive to our path to victory, but not predictive of it.
Right. It's August, Simone.
It's only August, honey. We have, again, as I said, we have yet to see our October surprise, and the Russians have not even directly weighed in yet, although there are reports that they have hired PR firms. I'm not even joking, folks. I'll have the full screen in the next hour. I want to play, Dan, for folks, this ad from the Harris campaign. It's titled Fearless, and I want to talk about some of the messaging on the other side.
This campaign is about who we fight for. We believe in a future where every person has the opportunity not just to get by, but to get ahead, where every senior can retire with dignity. But Donald Trump wants to take our country backward, to give tax breaks to billionaires and big corporations and end the Affordable Care Act. But we are not going back.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
So this is an ad that folks are going to see all across the country, Dan. But my question is, when folks are on the doors and they are on the phones, because this old school organizing, okay, that's how you get votes, what are they saying? Like, what is the message the campaign has? Because I think that campaigns, winning campaigns, are about hope, and they're about a vision for the future and about what candidates will do for folks if, in fact, they give them, the voters give them the opportunity to be elected.
I'm glad you asked that question, Simone. We get anecdotal reports and, of course, quantitative stuff from the field all the time. And the things we hear at the doors, millions of voter contacts this summer, are pretty consistent. We hear folks that want to work on lowering costs, and you heard the vice president talk about that directly in Atlanta at her big rally, that on day one, we're going to take on pharma, we're going to take on big corporations, we're going to take on corporate rent, we're going to take on price gouging. And she recognized that people aren't feeling the complete relief they need to feel. She said, you know it and I know it, the costs are still too high. We're on that on day one. Contrast that with what you heard in that ad, that Donald Trump again wants to go back to tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires, cut the Affordable Care Act or repeal it, cut Social Security. These are issues that come up on the doors all the time, as does some of the stuff voters are fearful of. Project 2025, we hear about that consistently, especially in black communities. They understand what a threat this is, and they do not want to go back to a darker day.
Dan, thank you so much. Folks, if the Harris campaign wins out, it'll be because Dan kept the troops together in the battle.
All props to Dan and his team. Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate your time, Dan.